I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Sias Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone, and welcome to Class Chat Barbarian, where we will have a friendly, non-rage-filled, hopefully, chat about the Barbarian
Are
class.
you sure it won't be rage-filled? I mean, the Barbarian can be very angry.
I mean, it certainly can. So, Barbarian is a class with a name that dates back through history. And there have been, several different, thoughts for etymologies of barbarian, such as people saying, well, maybe they had beards and it came from, barba from the Latin. But as far as I know, it came from the Greek because in ancient Greece, they believed everyone who were not them spoke in gibberish that just sounded like barba 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 like Charlie Brown.
Yes.
And so because in the ancient Greek world, every other language is Charlie Brown, barbarian became a thing. And so now we have a class, Barbarian. So last time on Class Chat, we talked a little bit about the Alchemist, which is really one of the sort of most innovative and different classes in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition core rulebook, with a design lead on that one of Stephen Radney McFarlane. And all of these were worked on by all the creators of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Some of them, the core four, Fighter, Cleric, Rogue, and Wizard, were iterated so many times in different vertical slices that everybody's fingerprints are on the beginning of all of them. Barbarian happens to be one of mine that I started out with, but it wouldn't be what it was without everybody else who refined it into the vision that you see here of an angry Amiri. Here's angry Amiri. She's so mad.
So yeah, the barbarian gets angry and smashes really hard.
Yes, it's not about the Greek idea of, it's someone from out there, it's someone uncivilized, but it is the idea that I wanted to play with in the concept of it, of an instinct. You can be a noble who just kind of goes out of control in fencing duels and maybe has been has issues in polite society, not because of the fact that they're not perfectly polite normally, but just that their rage, their instinct, there's something in their emotions that they can't keep a lid on completely. So that became sort of one of the defining features for the Barbarian, is there's some kind of instinct, there's some kind of thing inside of you, and that grants you great ability to smash and to fight, but also to not keep yourself completely in control.
So the Barbarian isn't going to be as accurate as the Fighter, and isn't going to be necessarily as well defined.
No one's as accurate as the Fighter, except for the playtest gunslinger.
But I mean, in comparison though, not necessarily as accurate or well defended, but they're gonna hit really, really, really hard.
Oh yes, they hit very hard when they go onto their out of control rage. So let's take a look at what the sort of the class is all about. So the one part I like to read at the beginning of this is just what the class says about what you're probably going to be doing. So it says, during combat encounters, you summon your rage and rush to the front lines and smash your way through. Offense is your best defense. Drop foes before they can exploit your relatively low defenses. During social encounters, use intimidation to get what you need, especially when gentler persuasion can't get the job done. Exploring, and look out for danger to rush headfirst into battle in an instant. Climb challenging rock wall, drop a rope for the others, wade into the risky currents to reach the hidden switch beneath the water's surface. If something needs breaking, you're up to the task. And in downtime, maybe carouse at the tavern, build up the fearsome legend of your mighty deeds, or recruit followers and become a warlord in your own right. You might have a deep-seated well of anger, hatred, and frustration, prefer a straightforward approach to one requiring patience and tedium, or engage in a regimen of intense physical fitness and punch anyone who says this conflicts with your distaste for patience and tedium. Others probably rely on your courage and strength and trust that you can hold your own in a fight, see you as uncivilized or a boorish lout, unfit for high society, and believe you are loyal to your friends and allies and will never relent until the fight is done. So that's who you are in the eyes of others and possibly yourself if you are a barbarian.
And speaking of never relenting, barbarians also have an absolute ton of hit points.
Oh, yes.
They can just keep
So
going
their base statistics is their key ability is strength, They have 12 hit points per level. Nobody else gets that many. That is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot. They're experts in perception, fortitude, and will, and trained in reflex. So they're going to just power through it, and just their mind is strong just because that instinct, that rage is inside of you. It's not because they're like, oh, I trained in a monastery to withstand this. It's just that, like, any will-based effect is fighting against that rage to take over. But that they're big and powerful, but they can't necessarily jump out of the way of a fireball as well as a rogue. That's why their reflex is their weakest.
So there's a question here. Was there any talk in the early stages here about giving the barbarian a different name, the berserker or something else?
Berserker, I think, is pretty bear specific. In general, for its for its etymology. I don't think I remember that, but so when we're looking at skills, we have athletics and 3 other skills. We've got all of martial, simple, and unarmed attacks, light and medium armor plus unarmored defense, and barbarian class DC, which we use for our barbarian special abilities. So that's what's built in terms of your starting stuff. You also get quite a lot of features. You start with rage, which you take an action, you go into a rage. That's going to give you your bonus damage, like you said, some temporary hit points, but a penalty to your armor class. You also won't be able to do certain things that require too much concentration while you're raging, such as the concentrate trait, except for seeking and a few concentrate actions that have the rage trait. Then you also have your instinct, which I was talking about before. That's like, where does your rage come from? Where does it well up from? And then you continue on by getting really good proficiency increases, special resistances when you're in your rage, the ability to do some weird action whenever you enter your range that comes from your barbarian actions, and then eventually the ability to rage again really soon after your last rage, and the Devastator ability to just ignore resistance to your physical damage up to 10 points.
And so I think of I know we'll talk about this too when we get into Bard as well, but when looking at rage and the idea of it being a state that you turn on that lasts for a while and then you need to rest for a little bit, as opposed to sort of the first edition version where it's you've got this pool and either you can keep going and then at some point you're out and you can't do it more for the day.
And it's round by round.
And it's round by round, yeah.
And it's scaled, so yeah, the thing with the round by round mechanism, which if you're watching this and you're just here for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Barbarian, you don't have to like worry about that because it doesn't exist, is that it quickly goes between it often, like, you don't have enough rounds for this, you barely can use it in the times that you really need it and have to just not play with the feature, to a very brief time where it's like, oh, this is interesting amount, where it's like, it's almost enough and I have to really decide which ones, but I could usually use it if I'm careful. And then quickly gets into, I have a glut of way too many of this, it will never run out, it is essentially at will. But here, since it was essentially at will at the end, and I don't have enough to use my cool thing all the time was not really fun as much, right? So changing it to, I can just use it all the time, is a strong play, because when you're the barbarian, you're thinking about the times you go into a rage and just wreck your opponents, more so than the times, oh, I couldn't go into a rage because of I used it too much that day, and we got to go into a fight where I didn't have my rage.
I think it makes it interesting to be able to have sort of that choice where whenever you need it, you're probably going to have access to it, but if you're continuing to fight for a long period of time or other things come up, you might not necessarily have it. Sort of the fundamental, some of the fundamental design in 2nd edition that pushes against that feeling of the 15-minute adventuring day where the best move is just to glut in everything, and then when you're hurt to retreat off and be done for the day. With having abilities that come back, having things that use other mechanics like focus points, and having ways to restore hit points and other things that are not purely consumable and not things that purely run out. That's
right. So looking in at the instincts, they have sort of two progenitors from Pathfinder 1st Edition Concept Land. One of which is the totem feats in Pathfinder First Edition that had like a beast totem and a dragon totem and other things like that. Very, very popular. They let you theme your barbarians. Usually there were 3 feats in a chain. And also the Blood Rager in Pathfinder First Edition had some very thematic, very cool visual abilities that were based on certain monster types and other things that would sort of be your bloodline. So the instincts sort of build off of those legacies. You get an animal instinct where your instinct is based upon some certain kind of animal. You can get like grow special deer antlers and fight with those. The dragon instinct where you either like you may revere dragons or you hate them because the dragons burn down your village at the beginning of the game. Like the character in the RPG I'm playing right now, that happened with the dragon. It's a very common trope. So with those, you can get draconic breath weapons and do like extra energy damage based on the dragon you love or hate.
Mm-hmm. And I saw someone in the chat before saying that they think it would be cool to expand that out to include some of the other dragons that appear in later books, and that like in a home game is absolutely something that you can do following that pattern.
I mean, it's also just the kind of thing that could be printed in a later book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Like, I could imagine something where that, you know, that wound up in a Lost Omens or a Back Matter article. If you had, like...
I don't happen to know of it existing yet, but I think that it's something that could naturally be expanded upon.
Like, imagine you had an AP that was all about, like, befriending that kind of dragon, and it was one that wasn't in there, and you wanted the dragon barbarian to be able to do things based on that. You could probably... Like, that's not a real AP, right? But you could put back matter stuff where you're like, oh yeah, you can have a dragon instinct abilities that are based on that one.
People are asking, what if the dragon you love does force damage or negative level damage or the most damaging force in the universe? Love! Yeah, I mean, that would be a case. That would be a case where certainly you would want to work that out because what is fair for sort of those more common damage types that have more common resistances is different from what might be fair for a damage that is, or an effect that is much harder to resist.
That's
but for
true.
The simple, you know...
For instance, positive energy dragon would not be that useful most of the time. Unless you're fighting undead a lot. But, you know, dragon's still cool. It can do some extra energy damage. The breath weapon is actually a later feat. Some of these have some extra feats, like animal can get more AC. It's really nice, and can do a pouncy thing. Dragons can get their breath and turn into a dragon. They each have an anathema that is... Anathema is a concept we haven't gotten to yet because we only did Alchemist. But it sort of encapsulates the idea that something is just so against the nature of the way that your powers work that it's bad to do it. And Barbarians have the kind of chillest anathema out of any class, so it's a good way to start. A lot of the other classes, like, if you do the anathema, somebody out there, like your deity or something, is really mad at you, and you've got to, like, make amends. With the Barbarian, you've just sort of done something that's against the well of fury within you, and so you're just not as mad about that kind of thing anymore. So you just lose the abilities of the instinct until you, like, center yourself for a very short period of time.
Center yourself back into your anger.
Yes! So you must become in line with your anger. Use your anger.
Haley said positive energy instinct. You yell at players and heal them.
Hey, now there is an instinct we're going to get to that has positive energy damage in its options, but it also lets you choose negative energy damage. Anyway, the Fury instinct is sort of the vanilla. Is the one for, like, I don't really have that much of an instinct, so I'll take some extra feats and defend against enemy weapons, and it's very generic. The Giant instinct, which is the one that our iconic Amiri has with her sort of backstory of having to deal with giants at very low levels, is all about the raw power and size of giants, and you have to accept personal challenges of strength, just like Amiri when her local villagers, who just kind of wanted to get rid of her, to be honest, were like, yeah, we challenge you to fight these giants. And she's like, okay, I'll fight the giant. And she beat the giant and then murdered them all with the sword.
Yep.
So that she got off the giant. So you can use these big oversized weapons. You do massive, massive damage with that weapon. But it gives you clumsy, which makes you worse at reflex saves and AC, because it's pretty big. And you can eventually grow super, super big and possibly have a ridiculously enormous reach and do all sorts of things with the giant barbarian. Then last but not least, in the core rulebook is the spirit barbarian. That's the one that can choose positive or negative damage. They are based on sort of a little haunted by the spirits around them. And so they don't want disrespecting corpses and spirits. That they can get positive and negative damage. Their weapon is going to be ghost touch, like pretty much immediately, as long as they're in their rage, and they can get some like swirling spirits to protect them, or make ranged spirit based attacks against very short ranged against people with some of their later feats. And spirit is also one that, like, some of these other ones were just like, these are obvious ones, but spirit is one I knew was cool because Linda's barbarian, Illyria, who we mentioned, the alchemist class, because she was the multi-class alchemist art in the core rulebook, is also a spirit barbarian. That was sort of her theme, and it's got some really, really nice themes and stories that you can tell about it. And so it kept some of that story about, like, these spirits being around and being connected to your character. There's one new instinct that's not here, that's in the advanced player's guide, because it's actually pretty advanced. But we kind of playtested it, sort of, because we removed it from the playtest for the final book, and then put it back in the advanced player's guide. It was the superstition instinct. Is based on just not liking magic at all. So you have an anathema that's a lot... It's still chill that you only have to wait a day to get your stuff back, but it's still a lot less friendly than the other ones. Not being able to have people use magic to help you is a big deal in a game with this much magic. It gives you, like, more stuff. Like some pretty good resistances and healing capability and just an anti-magic effect that in the playtest, Ron Lundeen, who is one of our developers, decided to come in because he's like, I'm not so sure about this superstitious barbarian thing. I'm going to try it in the second to last part of the playtest, which was super high level. And it's a social environment. It was the social playtest, and he didn't have that many social skills. He said, I want to see what I can do with this character. And by the end, he was like, I came in, and I wasn't sure, but this character was really good. And he was spell sundering through so many things that Steven, who had written the adventure, put up. And Steven was like, you can do what? And Ron's like, I know he left the wall force to block us off. I just cut through the wall of force. Steven's like, how does that ability work? You looked at it, it's like, whoa, okay, yeah, you guys just get through. It was pretty epic. So, it's definitely more advanced, though, because not being able to accept spells, well, it does mean our previous class that we went over, the Alchemist, is going to be your friend. I was playing an Alchemist in that one, and my healing was very, very helpful for Ron's Barbarian. Alright, so Barbarians also have a lot of cool feats, and the feats that Barbarians have in both the core rulebook and the Advanced Player's Guide are focused around the idea of rage. A lot of them give you new actions that you can only take during a rage, or special abilities or benefits during the raid, like being more intimidating, howling at your foes.
And there's all sorts of things too involving senses and movement. Being able to just climb up walls, being able to sniff out your enemies, being able to move super fast, things like that.
There are even some that can help you do some of the athletics-based maneuvers on your opponents, like Furious Bully, just to get better at it. You can get Thrash, where once you have an enemy grab, you just kind of thrash them around and deal damage to them, and then at higher levels, you thrash them into another foe, and the foe, you're like, I'll smash you with this guy. In the Advanced Player's Guide adds more in that vein, including one that's very similar to the old X-Men Fastball Special, where you throw your ally at something. Because you want to throw your ally at something. And especially if you're a barbarian, it might be just because you want to throw the bard at something because you want to help the bard get there, or it might just be that you want to throw the bard at something because the bard has annoyed you to the point that you want to throw it towards the dragon, whatever happens after that. There's all sorts of special abilities like that for the barbarian. There are ways to get even more reach. There are ways to knock the enemy away. It's a lot about being strong, being angry, and
it's very physical too. It's about
Yes.
moving your body. It's about moving.
It's visceral.
Yes,
and
exactly.
physical.
Moving the bodies of others, throwing them about, tripping them, grabbing them, moving them, lunging at them, doing a big whirlwind attack.
Yes, definitely. They've got that. They've got things where like enemies decide that they are they're gonna try to hit you, and you decide that you are gonna hit them. For example, that is definitely a thing that shows up for Barbarian.
And then, of course, there's quite a few that are based off of the instincts that let you augment the abilities that
we
come
kind
from
of mentioned them
instinct as
in
well,
the instincts, like dragon wings and dragon breath, and growing to size huge, or pouncing onto the enemies, or getting spirits to just to sort of like appear and attack your foes. There's some to share your rage with your allies, not your enemies. That would be an interesting one. But where you can give some of the benefits of your rage to your allies. And one I like at 20th level, where every 10 minutes you could stomp the ground so hard that there's an earthquake, because you're really mad at level 20 Barbarian, like really bad, and maybe you're mad at the ground. Honestly, it just reminds me somewhat of in one of my first like 3rd edition games, there was a barbarian who got up to epic levels, and he hated the ground because he kept falling into it and taking falling damage, and it wasn't even that much, but he decided he had favorite enemy ground, and anytime he fell from a really high height, he would try to like cleave the ground for extra damage. And so with Quaking Stomp, that barbarian would be able to really do more effects on the ground now than he was ever able to do before.
Was that the one who rolled like a giant chain of natural 20s?
Yes. And it's also the same one who built had an epic rod crafter build a 100-foot, 500-foot long immovable rod, then triangulated the location of an enemy's barrier generating magic item based on finding places in the sphere where their magic turned off, because the barrier turned off their magic, to figure out where it actually was. Then, to make sure he was in a straight line, used like a fireman's pole, the 500-foot long immovable rod, and then dropped, cleaving through every floor of the castle, the ground, and into the underground place where the artifact was.
The ground was in his way.
Yeah. I'm telling you, the ground is just something that barbarians sometimes have to deal with, and so that's why, I wanted there to be a feature where just the ground is up. That's it. The barbarian wins, the ground loses every 10 minutes. Basically the barbarian does a lot of fun things, and it's certainly, I would say, is not the case that the barbarian is just like, oh, this is so much more powerful than the fighter, why would you play a fighter? They're both good at very different things, but I think the barbarian is a little bit more of like a over the top with what it does, whereas the fighter is just like, wow, this character is really good at weapons, and wow, they're hitting, they're critting, they do cool things, and they really know how to use their weapons, whereas the barbarian is like, spirits or dragons are surrounding me, and I'm really angry, and I'm gonna do these things. So let's see, is there anything else that's super major to talk about in terms of the barbarian?
I think those are the main things. I know we did, the alchemist one was longer, but the
alchemist is also like, to start, maybe not like, it's not the easiest to start with, because it is the class that is the most like sort of different and requires a good amount of explanation for what it is and what it isn't, and how it works, and how some of its abilities are hidden in the items section. With the barbarian, I promise you, none of your abilities are hidden in the items section. I mean, you'll get a really cool weapon that's in the items section, but in the barbarian section is where you get mad and turn into a dragon or a giant.
Wormius was asking about what kind of like dedications and multi-class.
Oh, that's right. So last time we talked about the barbarian, the alchemist multi-class. So let's talk about the barbarian multi-class, because you're still a barbarian if you take the barbarian multi-class. You just aren't using the art for Linda's character.
Kitsune Warlock recommended the Sorcerer.
Then you're the true Blood Rager.
Yes.
But it's a little tricky because of the concentration effects. But, so let me turn to the Barbarian multi-class. That is, well, we can see Linda's character again on the facing page, but that is this angry bear. The druid's angry, the bear's angry, everyone is angry. So,
why is everyone so angry?
It's just like, look how angry she is.
Yeah,
She's really mad. The bear is equally mad. So the Barbarian dedication is a great one for you if what you really want is to get a little bit of rage, and you never say no to a little bit of extra damage. You can pick up bonus hit points even if you are another martial class, which none of the other resiliency feats let you do. And then you can pick some of those Barbarian feats and instincts abilities. It's also a good one if your class is real good at saves except for Master, because it can bump you over to Master, except for Fortitude.
Yeah.
Except for Master, what is the Master save? It's Fortitude is your save that you're gonna have issues with. Barbarian multi-class is gonna bump you up.
Mm-hmm.
There is a general feat that can do that, but it takes until level 17. This can do it at level 12. And if you want to, you can save that general feat for Perception or some other thing. So, Barbarian actually works surprisingly well. One of the weaknesses of Barbarian multi-class, if you're a very action-starved at the beginning of the fight class, is that it does ask you to rage with that one action at the beginning of the fight, which could be an issue for you if you have a lot of other things you're going to do on that turn. And it's very good for you if you kind of were like, yeah, I don't really know what my third action is on the first turn, but hey, I'd love to get 2 extra damage that can eventually move on into some of those Barbarian feats. So that's where you're at on Barbarian being the one that you multi-class into. We talked about Alchemist in that way. But the question in the chat is also, what are some good ones to multi-class from Barbarian into, or archetypes to take? So Barbarian actually does surprisingly well with a huge number of different multi-classes and archetypes. The thing to watch out for is that Kitsune Warlock is exactly right that Sorcerer is cool and has some fun synergies, but if it's got concentration, which Sorcerer and the Spellcasters do, there's a feat you can take, but to do concentration effects by spending an extra action, but it is going to lock down your positioning when you're doing that. Whereas anything you can find that doesn't use concentration is going to work really well and really interestingly. Like, you can just flip through them and see, like, want to be a barbarian with some alchemical items so you can mutagen while you rage and just get really angry? You can, and it can work out really well for you. Want to be a champion barbarian who's super angry but also, like, protects allies? So it's like, well, you better beat up the barbarian because all those allies are reducing damage by a lot for the champion's reaction. It's great. Do you want to play a barbarian fighter where you've got some of those fighter-specific abilities for two-handed weapons or whatever your weapon style is? Fighter is a good choice. With the Advanced Player's Guide archetypes for some of the weapon styles, you might be able to go into those and in some cases get the feat that you wanted sooner than if you went pure fighter. So that's something to consider as well. Monk. I mean, heck, what animal instinct barbarian, which already use unarmed attacks, does not want to have a flurry of blows with their, like, monstrously powerful unarmed attacks that do some of the most damage in the game of any unarmed attack that a PC can get their hands on, and you can do 2 of them for 1 action? I mean, sign me up for that. I think it's even in the list of multi-class monk characters. It's so it turns out in some of these martial multi-classes we had space for something else, but we had done all the feats that were really needed to represent the multi-class. So there's some suggestions. It says barbarian monks with the animal instinct combine the barbarian's excellent unarmed damage with the monk's diverse unarmed special abilities. So let's see. The ranger can work well potentially with the barbarian because it can help you. It synergizes as well with some of the out-of-combat things barbarians can be good at, with some of the things that ranger can grant you. Rogue can be...
if you're picking up some ranger stuff and you're a barbarian with scent who can move really fast.
Yep. And rogues can be fun because they're good at skills and they can cover their weak save of reflex with the rogue's evasiveness ability. Meanwhile, you might think, oh, well, I don't want to use these 2 short swords or whatever with my barbarian or a rapier to short sword because I'm going to use my strength. I'm a barbarian. But there's nothing in the rogue that says you have to use your dexterity to attack to get the sneak attack. It just has to be those kind of style of weapons.
Yeah.
So, and there's also ruffian who have some other choices as well. But even if you're not a ruffian, if you go rogue and then like maybe 2-weapon warrior and go into a bunch of archetypes, you could make a pretty powerful barbarian that rages, attacks with all of the double slices around all of these weapons if you want, and gets in some sneak attack in addition to your rage damage so that you can do all the damage. And that's the ones from the core. Of the ones in the Advanced Player's Guide, probably Swashbuckler works a little better with Barbarian, but not necessarily as well as you might hope, just simply because the Swashbuckler likes to build up with special actions towards doing a big finisher, but the Barbarian's attacks are so huge already that it's like, do I need it to be a finisher, or should I just smash them again? But it still can, because the setup, if you have a build where the setup actions themselves are good, for instance, a Braggart Swashbuckler wants to use Intimidation. And guess what? The Barbarian can do some really amazing Intimidation abilities. So, you could potentially do that. And he's like, well, I was going to do a Terrifying Howl anyway, so I might as well have some extra finisher
I can see
abilities.
they talked about a summoner who throws their Eidolon.
There you go. You could do it. You could have a summoner who throws your Eidolon. You could have an Eidolon that's like shaped like a ball that you throw at people. I could see it. So, yeah, no, Barbarian actually, surprisingly maybe, because the theme seems like maybe it wouldn't synergize with some of these things that I just said, but there's thematic and story ways to hook them together, and also mechanical ways that they work together pretty well. Oh, Rex Liquid points out Dragon Disciple, of course. It's a great one for Barbarian, especially a Dragon Barbarian. It gives you some even more additional dragony things that you can drag in, so that you can drag in.
Oh, and Viking dedication as well.
Viking
yes, for sure.
is a classic. That's another good one that you can go with. Because the thing about it is, you can wield the biggest weapon, and you will do the most damage. But another sneaky thing you can do with the Barbarian is you can say, I'm comfortable with my damage. I know it's very high. So, like a Viking, I can just have a one-handed weapon and use my Barbarian rage damage to make sure that still does, like, an obscene amount of damage. Just not as obscene. And then have a shield in your other hand. And you're still doing a good amount of damage. Like, not as much as the two-handed Barbarian. But percentage-wise, right, you're not reducing your damage by as much. And so, therefore, it's very interesting. It leaves a different option than you might expect. It's kind of the same reason why, like, that you could do a 2-weapon rogue barbarian that we were talking about before and have it still work out.
Oh, and Bastion Giant Instinct Barbarian with a huge shield.
Yeah, you could absolutely
sure.
do a Bastion Giant Instinct with the barbarian with a huge shield. You could also get extra benefits, or sort of extra cool points if you use the Lost Omens character guide, I want to say, feat that lets you two-hand your gigantic, and you'd have a gigantic shield. Two-hand your shield to get more, like, hardness from it. It's like Everstand or something like that in the Knights of Lastwall. So then you could just two-hand an enormous shield, and that's just like that's the only weapon that you have.
And then you try to like bull rush people
like
around.
Goofy in Kingdom Hearts. So yeah, it's Ever something stand. I think it's Everstand. That's right, Kitsune Warlock. So yeah, there's actually a lot you can do with the Barbarian. It's surprisingly flexible class, I guess. I mean, I'm surprised by it, and I designed it to try to make it be flexible, but I didn't expect it would work as well as it did with some other things. It's not just as niche as you might have think. It doesn't mean that you're from like a culture that automatically is one that you might associate with the word barbarian. It doesn't mean that your character is
always angry.
Is
100%
always angry all the time.
Yeah.
It means that just your character has something that is inside of them that brings these emotions out.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be any character that does that, and that's sort of why it fits together well. So I think that is basically it for the Barbarian.
So let's go ahead
say bye to YouTube.
Say goodbye to YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye.